Hello to everybody. How are you all doing? I hope that everybody has had a good first 2 weeks of classes, both online and in person, and that you are remaining safe and healthy. And if you are needing anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to me to ask, inquire, state, insert any verb there that you wish. It is my intention to respond to emails as soon as I receive them. However, sometimes some emails will take a little bit longer to respond to, but I will get back with you. We're going to be going over chapter 3 today in this presentation, and it is on theories of aging in the textbook. I wanted to also let you know that we have a gerontology club here on campus, and our first meeting is going to be Monday, on the 31st, so this coming Monday, at 7 o'clock in room 151 in Weinbrenner, WTS. If you are unable to attend this meeting, but you would like to receive emails, or even if you are at this meeting, we will be putting together a mailing list. And if you would like to receive the emails to know about upcoming meetings, please let me know. Just send me an email and I will send that on to our club secretary, Maddie Tezzi. That's all for announcements and general information. We'll go ahead and get started on the presentation. I'm going to go off of the video. Okay. So chapter 3, theories of aging, where we are discussing the different thoughts and ideas and processes that try to explain aging and try to explain how individuals age, what are some of the aspects of that aging process that they go through that might be able to be further explained through research, through literature, and through these different theories of aging. For some of you, you have already encountered some of these theories of aging. We may have talked about them in a few of our other gerontology courses, but what we need to focus on as far as what exactly a theory is, we all pretty much know that the theories are going to be, they're going to be pieces of information that we can string together to try to understand human behavior, to try to understand societal decisions, to try to understand policy and procedure. And for the most part, theories are not created in a vacuum. And what that means is that we look at what the social environment is doing. We don't just say, okay, we're just going to create this theory because it sounds wonderful. We don't know whether it actually exists or occurs. It's through observation that we are able to address those theories of aging. So we know that theories are going to be broad expectations that are going to be providing some kind of structure to be able to organize and to be able to interpret a number of facts that we can observe and how those facts that we observe relate to one another. This chapter is going to be talking about the origins of social gerontology, the micro, and then also the macro theories of aging. These little blurbs, these couple of slides here, this one and the next one, are ones that I took verbatim from the book. In every culture and historical period, the society and individual prepare in advance for the ultimate disengagement of death. I want you to pay attention to that word, disengagement, by an inevitable, gradual, and mutually satisfying process of social disengagement prior to death. The individual retreats from the social world, which in turn relieves him of normative control. This process is functional, or the individual in the sense that it goes with having a high morale, and it is functional for the society in that it retires an age echelon from the roles which young people may then fill. So Dr. Pitt, what does that mean in real words, right? This is the disengagement theory brought to the forefront by Cummings and Henry. And this theory is one where it is believed that the individual is going to just leave their social world, and that social world is going to in turn relieve them of that ability and that control within that social world. So it's going to be a process that the individual, in his sense of high morality or her sense of high morality, means that this individual is seeing that they need to be disengaging from society. And it's functional for society because then it allows younger individuals to come up and take the role or the place of this individual. That may seem a little barbaric. And to some gerontologists, it did. It seemed a very barbaric theory. So much so to the point that Havinghurst, in 1968, developed what's called the activity theory. And this is just an excerpt. The decrease in interaction proceeds against the desires of most aging men and women. The older person who ages optimally, so we're looking at optimal aging, is the person who stays active and who manages to resist the shrinkage of his social world. So we're thumbing our nose at the disengagement theory in this statement. We don't feel that it's right for us to expect people to disengage from their social world. We kind of want them to remain active. They don't have to completely disengage. We want them to be active in it and active in their own world. He or she maintains the activities of middle age as long as possible and then finds substitutes for work when he or she is forced to retire, and substitutes for friends and loved ones whom he loses by death. And pardon me for that typo there, it's supposed to be retired, not retired. So we remain active in our world, so much so to the point that in our middle age, we work and work and work and work, and we participate and we're active all the way up until the point where we feel that we need to maybe pull back a little bit on the activity. And sometimes we're going to substitute that activity for other activities. So if I work and then I retire, then I'm going to look to volunteer, or maybe babysit my grandchildren, or maybe find a part-time job, but to fulfill that time and that substitute for work. And also, I find it very interesting, this little statement here at the bottom, that we also need to find substitutes for loved ones who we lose by death. Meaning, don't go through the rest of your life after you lose people alone. So the origins of social gerontology is a point in time where we see where many individuals just focused on that age of as a period of inevitable physical and mental decline, that no matter what, we're all growing old and it's just going to be this terrible time in our lives because physically we're going to decline and mentally we're going to decline. We are paying attention to those physical changes. Sometimes it might be in the form of a diminished short-term memory, or we have some vision losses. And we also paid attention to this increased vulnerability to diseases like heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And so if all we're doing is paying attention to those two things, the physical and the mental decline, are we really doing a service to those older adults who don't have that physical or that mental decline? This was the very first acknowledgement of any literature making statements about the aging process. And the theories behind the aging process. So this is a book by Caven, and it's called Personal Adjustment in Old Age. This came out in 1949. And that this was where we finally said, you know what, maybe we don't need to think that there is going to be decline in old age, and that it really is not inevitable. It also took a look at the fact of there being a poor adjustment period for individuals who may be lacking activity. So if they are no longer active, but they were before, they're having a more difficult time, and they're adjusting poorly to growing older and adjusting poorly to this new life. So looking at this, then we say that people who continue to lead active and productive lives remained well adjusted in old age. So this is this book, Personal Adjustment in Old Age, which then led us to what is called the Kansas City Study of Adult Life. This was a study that looked at how people perform in specific roles as they age. So how do I perform as a spouse? How do I perform as a parent and as a worker as I age through my years? And how am I adjusting to those times as in those roles? The central concept of it is focusing on that social role. And the social role is going to be that expectation that is given that certain position or that status. So as a spouse, how am I expected socially to be behaving? How as a parent? How as a worker? And that these individuals can perform roles either well or poorly. The only issue that they really had, not the only, an issue that they had with this study was that there wasn't anybody really over the age of 70 who participated in this study. And also the individuals that did participate, they were only interviewed once. So our first formal theory of aging is this disengagement theory. And this is that first one that I read to you from that excerpt from Cumming and Henry. This is a proposal by them that normal aging does involve some kind of a natural and some kind of an inevitable mutual withdrawal or disengagement. And you notice the word mutual. It's on both sides, that the individual disengages and society disengages from the individual. So what happens is that because the individual is moving toward their eventual death, it's a necessity for society and the individual to sever their ties so that it's not going to be a disruption when that person does eventually pass away. This was how this theory was viewed and was born. When we have the that severance of those ties, then what's going to happen is there's going to be an inevitable decreased interaction between the aging person and the society in which they're living. Their death may not be for many years, but the disengagement theory would dictate that you need to prepare for your death no matter when that death occurs. And if it looks like it's coming sooner rather than later, maybe within the next 5 years, just because of your advancing age, then you need to start doing things to start disengaging from society. And that this process was universal, meaning it happens to everybody, and it's inevitable. It means that it's just going to happen. So then having her said, you know what, boy, that disengagement theory, whew, that is pretty rough. So I'm going to take a little bit more of a positive approach to this. It's also known as the implicit theory of aging, so that the activity theory is. This is believed that the person who is optimally aging is going to be able to stay active, and that they're going to be able to resist that shrinkage of their social world. We also call this successful aging. Successful aging depends on a few factors. One, if you're optimally aging, you are able to physically still do things. 2, that you are cognitively able to continue to remain active and optimally age. And 3, that you have social ties and social roles and social supports that you are able to still successfully age. So the question then is begged, well, if I don't remain as active as I did, if I do kind of disengage from some things, am I no longer optimally aging? Am I now engaged in the disengagement theory? I still do things, I'm still active, but I might be active in a different way. Or I might be active cognitively, but not physically because I have physical impediments that don't allow me to be as active. So we have to then not pit the other against the other, the one against the other, but we do need to look at this from the point of view of disengagement versus activity theories. We don't really like to say that the expectation of voluntarily or involuntarily disengaging is considered to be a normal aging pattern. It's not normal aging to expect somebody to just pull away from everything that they know and just go off to pass away. We can't have one and be the other. We can't disengage and still remain active. It makes it very difficult to be able to do so. The better predictors that can be correlated with disengagement that's better than activity level is widowhood, poor health, and retirement. So in retirement or in widowhood or in poor health, we may see some disengagement. We may see some disengagement that is good, some that is poor, especially with widowhood, disengagement of the role of then being a spouse moves you into a bereaved spouse, moves you into widowhood. It can also move you into losing some of those social structures because for some spouses, the friends may have been the other spouses and then they lose those ties and those connections. Poor health, if we can't get out and do the way that we want to, we might necessarily have to disengage for a period of time or up until our death. Then we have what's called the continuity theory. This is from Ashley. This is going to be more of a formal elaboration on that activity theory, and we're using our life course perspective, the life course perspective that we talked about in chapter 2, that's going to define what is normal aging. How does our personality play a role as we adjust to aging? How does our adult development across the lifespan address aging? Normal aging itself is going to be something that is not very well or very easily defined because it's one of those, well, it's all relative. I had another assignment in another class where I asked them how old was old, and I heard, well, you know, age is relative. The answer is relative. It's on a case-by-case basis. So it would follow that normal aging is also considered to be on a case-by-case basis, okay? So the continuity theory is the concept that we will remain active and we will continue. It's kind of a marriage between the two, disengagement and activity, but more activity. We will continue on in the roles that we wish to continue on in. And if we should come to a point where it's a decision to disengage, I may continue in another manner, but it won't be in the same manner as I would have before. Does it mean that I am not active? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that I'm continuing to choose differently. So as I disengage from my work, I may choose to volunteer. If I choose to volunteer in something that is not as physically demanding, but it is just as equally demanding cognitively, I'm not necessarily disengaging completely from what I'm doing. I am not necessarily continuing to be as active as I was in that prior position, but I'm continuing. I'm continuing on with something that is going to allow me to address how I feel. It allows me to address my personality. I may want to go work at a food bank for the rest of my life. And I retire and then I go and I work. And maybe me working at a food bank is just doing some paperwork. Am I as active as I was before? No, but I'm continuing on in something that's going to help me continue to develop as an adult throughout this process. The concept of the subculture theory is that we have some common interests. And this is a theory that was proposed by Arnold Rose. We have common interests. Some of us have common role changes. Some of us have common generational experiences. And that some individuals can be drawn together because of one reason or another. As a statement here on this slide, that some older people can be drawn together because they're excluded by younger people. We would hope that it is not an intentional exclusion. However, exclusion does occur. And subcultures develop when we have individuals sharing similar interests, individuals sharing similar concerns, or when there are some long-standing friendships. The subculture theory addresses, let's say, for example, technology. That if we as an older adult don't necessarily understand how to use a tablet or a smartphone, we may also share common interests with people who still like to talk to their grandchildren on the telephone and may not share the same interests with individuals who are extremely technologically savvy and know everything there is about every single communication standard. These subcultures develop also when individuals are excluded from full participation in a wider society. And in that statement, we have to also address the question of social justice in there. How do we exclude and why do we exclude? Who's being excluded? What are the reasons? Is it a societal reason for that exclusion? Is it coming from the individual and how they feel about the issue at hand? And do they necessarily want to participate in that group of individuals or in that thought process? We have to also address that in these subculture concepts, in these theories, is that older adults who are physically and mentally in good health, they are actually held in a higher status. If you ever speak to an older adult, and I'll give you as an example, my father was known to say things like, oh, he really let himself go, or he's really in good shape. He would never make a comment about a female that way. It would always be about his male peers. But it was always based on physical and mental ability or mental capacity. That if they let themselves go, he did not hold them to a higher status, as opposed to somebody who took care of themselves and watched what they ate and watched their weight and exercised and were physically involved. And this was not just in his own age group. This was in any age group. He would have a specific standard that he would hold. And there are these pockets of subcultures that have that belief system. However, the fact that we think that just being old is a subculture, we don't really think that anymore. that's not a subculture. There are subcultures within the aging individuals, but just being an aging individual is not a subculture itself. Another theory is the exchange theory. And the exchange theory is where we may see some unequal aspects, and the resources might not be there for one individual, but it may be there for somebody else. So let's use, for example, a widow and another widow. They have their own friendship. However, one of them is not able to drive. So the ability to get in a car and go by herself is no longer there. That's an unequal resource. She doesn't have a car anymore because if she can't drive, she doesn't need a car, but she has needs. She needs to go to the doctor. She needs to go to the dentist. She needs to go to the grocery store. And she relies on her friendship of the other widow who is able to offer those services to her. So there's an exchange. And the exchange is that the benefit out of it is the friendship, because they're widows. They may have a difficult time. One picks the other one up when the other one's down. But this is a material example of that exchange, where the individual doesn't have a car, relies on the friendship and the ability of the other individual to be able to take her places. And the benefit is greater than the cost. The cost of her going and picking up her friend is very minimal compared to the benefits that occur with those social interactions and the conversations and the ability for the widow who can't drive anymore to go to the store and carry out all of her chores and her errands that she needs to run. We can also see this exchange theory within the different generations, within the different age cohorts. An older adult may not be on the same level of a younger adult. So the resources are unequal, meaning if we have a younger individual who's going to teach the older adult how to use a tablet, the resources are unequal. The knowledge that the younger adult has about how to do these things is great, but the benefit is going to be greater than the cost of having to teach. There are going to be developments of a relationship between that younger adult and the older adult. The older adult is going to receive some knowledge, and the exchange is not just one way. The exchange goes the other way. The younger adult's going to benefit from maybe some stories that the older adult tells, maybe some oral history of the ability to convey what it was like to live during the Korean War and the Vietnam War, or what it was like to be raised by Depression era parents. So it's that exchange theory, and it can happen on a number of different levels. It's not just what we can learn or what we can gain. It can be just in the basic form of friendships. There are some criticisms to the exchange theory. It doesn't really recognize the distinction between what would be an immediate strategy as opposed to a deferred strategy. There's also the concept that the generations that can take place in the exchanges over the life course, these exchanges can last a long time. So it's not where we look at it being immediate. We don't see the immediate benefits of it, but what are some of the deferred benefits? At the time, it may seem like, oh my gosh, I've got to go and teach my grandmother how to use this tablet. I'm not really appreciating the fact that I have to go do this for the 10th time because she doesn't really listen to me, or she doesn't really grasp the concept. Grandmother on the other side is thinking, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm ever going to understand this tablet. I'm not going to be able to do this. the immediate strategy or the immediate benefit in this is just really the interaction, but the deferred benefits maybe on down the road when the grandmother passes away, the young adult says, I'm really glad I had that time with her. I really appreciated the fact that I was able to take the time to talk with her, to get to know her better, even if it seemed a little strained or disheartening at the time. Okay, so yes, it does. It can ignore sometimes within that exchange theory that value of those resources of love and companionship. So even though I kind of talked more about those non-rational resources, those are things that we don't necessarily recognize at the beginning. We only look at, okay, widow one doesn't have a car and can't drive, widow two has a car, okay, put them together. The exchange theory is that widow one gets her stuff done, widow two is doing widow one a favor. But in the long run, those non-rational resources of companionship are those things that sometimes don't necessarily get recognized in this exchange theory. And then social constructionism, this where we are looking at human beings as being the person that is creating their own social reality. They're constructing it themselves. And how those social meanings of age and self-conceptions arise through the negotiation of how I'm constructing my own social, in my own social reality. It reminds us that older people are not just going to be passively working through this, they are actively working in their own social worlds to try to construct something that makes sense to them, or something that works for them, or something that's beneficial to them, or beneficial to family. The modernization theory is that there once used to be this golden age of aging. The old were very few in number, and they held great power and authority in their community and in their family. And down here we see a picture of a relatively older looking adult, okay, standing with a bunch of younger looking people. That modernization was then responsible for the decline in the status of the age. So this theory is that we used to revere our older adults, but as the world modernized, we started to see a decline in that status. As we moved from working from home to working in the factory, there was a decline in the number of self-employed individuals. Older individuals lost their economic independence. Many actually were forced into retirement. And then what happened is once the rural areas started to become urbanized, once areas became urbanized around large cities, the young individuals were pulled away from the rural areas and they moved to these larger cities, which then destroyed that extended family household, and it also started to isolate the elderly. The age stratification theory is one where we recognize what is that relationship between age and the social structure that is around, and that we start to really group people into social categories, that we start, so societies do this. They allow us to identify socially as a specific something, okay? Age is a principle of ranking along with wealth, with gender, with race. So the age stratification theory is going to be one that is going to look at that relationship between age and between wealth, or age and gender, or race and age. It's the intersectionality of those things, or wealth and gender, or race and gender, or all of these things. The research is based on 4 questions. So how does an individual's location in changing the age structure of society influence their behaviors and their attitudes? How do they relate to each other within and between their age strata. So how does, and I'm just going to use this as a generational conversation, how does a baby boomer relate to a millennial? How does a baby boomer relate to a Gen X individual? How do individuals pass through these transitions of infancy to childhood, to adolescence, to adulthood, to old age? And what's the impact of the answers on these questions, on society as a whole? The political economic theories are going to be concerned with how society, or how the social aspect struggles are embedded in how the age are defined and treated. So there are going to be power relationships between politics, the economy of the older adults versus society, and that those how that comes out is how do we distribute the resources that are available? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all large social policies, how are those resources divided up to help support those programs? How are we able to address the inequality of some of those programs? And how does that inequality break down according to class, or according to race, or according to gender, and sometimes according to age? So if there are a very limited amount of resources that are available in a county puts forward a levy, and the levy is voted down. And that levy was meant to support Job and Family Services. Job and Family Services has two prongs in Hancock County. One is Child Protective Services and the other is Adult Protective Services. Well, now APS and CPS have to fight for resources within Job and Family Services because the levy was turned down. It's those types of social struggles that can be political, they can be economic, and we need to address how that affects certain populations. The feminist theories, these are going to be where we pay attention to what are the gender relations, and that's going to be the main subject. So, you know, the main question is why are women more poorly paid than men? Good question, isn't it? So how do we answer that? What does the effect have as far as a woman's familial responsibilities on their employment? Why are poverty rates higher among women than men at all stages of the life course? So we look at theories that are considered feminist theories, and there are a number of them. You have to fulfill a few requirements to be classified as such. You have to focus on the fact that gender relations are going to be the main subject matter. And the fact that we recognize that masculinity and femininity are going to be socially constructed. What it means to be deemed masculine, what it means to be feminine. And that there's going to be emphasis that's going to be placed on the different ways that aging is experienced by men and women. I have a class called Gender and Aging, where we talk about women and men in the aging process. So that is, it's basically a feminist theory class that I teach. And it looks at what is the difference for women versus what is the difference for men in this aging process. The critical gerontology theory is going to consider how globalization is going to affect policies and programs, and how it's going to affect the daily lives of older people. So we're looking at how research on aging has been based on what popular culture kind of shows what aging looks like, and how we might see some of this being based on outdated theories. Aging is going to affect everyone. And being in the theory of critical gerontology, that is, we're looking at how we are perceiving aging on a global scale, not just a national, not local. We have to start local and we have to think national as well, but on the global scale. Because this affects individuals, it affects families, it affects nations around the world. All right, so that is the chapter 3 presentation. Go ahead and end this with a statement that you're going to just be looking through, just familiarize yourself with these theories. There are quite a few of them. And kind of decide, you know, what theories do you think stink and what theories do you think work? What do you think is a good way to try to describe what social gerontology is? Okay? All right, so I will have this posted and, well, obviously I'll have this posted. I'm gonna post this, that's what I'm trying to say. And if you have any questions about the assignment, please let me know. I think that's all. Have a good day.